Analysis of last 6 examiner reports for AA. So my dear friends, if you feel that you do not have the sufficient time to go for the analysis of examiner reports yourself, do not worry. Just watch this video till the end and I will tell you the exact analysis of last 6 examiner reports that is available for AA. And if you watch this video till the end and if you like it, do hit the like button, subscribe to this channel and share this video with other ACCA aspirants as well. So my dear friends, let's quickly go through the content. My dear friends, when I talk about the examiner reports, so first thing that we are going to cover is that what does it reveal. Then we are going to discuss about the biggest repeated examiner comments that is there, what do they complain about. Then we are going to discuss about how to target, how to score maximum marks and how to prepare for your section 8 that is objective type questions. And then we are going to discuss about different types of most frequently asked questions and how to answer them as well effectively. And then we are going to talk about the summary of the examiner tips, and we are also going to discuss about the final strategy that you need to follow to score good marks in AA. And my dear friends, then we are going to discuss about some of the most important ISS, and then we are also going to discuss about the magic formulas to score maximum marks in your AA paper. So watch this video till the end and we are going to cover everything in detail. Let's first start with what examiner reports reveal. What do they reveal? That's the first thing that we need to ask. That we say that we are analyzing the examiner reports, but what do they reveal? So it reveals the common mistakes. Common mistakes as in the mistakes that a lot of students, a major part of the students commit. Say if we talk about one of the common mistakes, it is writing generalized language. That is not the audit specific language, but a generalized language. That could be a common mistake. So we will discuss about all of these mistakes here. Then exact examiner expectation. See, when you want to score good marks, what you should be very, very clear about the concepts, but other than the concepts, you also need to be clear about the expectation. See, even if you write the best answer for the audit risk question, but if you do not understand the expectations of the examiner, then even your best answer might not fetch good marks, right? So we need to understand what is the examiner's expectation and then we need to answer sufficiently to that. Then how marks are awarded. See, there could be a case of say ethical issues, okay, and you have given the appropriate analysis, you have given the appropriate conclusion as well, but it might happen that the examiner wanted something else and you have answered something else, and even if your answer is good, you might not fetch the appropriate marks. So it is very important to understand how marks are awarded, that is for what points the marks are awarded. And then finally, what not to do. See, it is important to know what to do, but it is equally important to know what not to do. So we are going to cover all of that here under the examiner report analysis. Now let's come to the second part. We have done this. Now let's come to the second part, which is biggest repeated examiner complaints. When I say complaints, it means that they have been telling us that do not commit this, do not do this, do not perform like this, but the students are still committing the same mistakes. And this is something that is the summary part. Even if you read all of the examiner reports separately, you will find the similar points written over everywhere, and that is why it is sufficient if you go through this point only. Okay, now students do not answer the requirements. What do they mean? So we are writing the answers. How can they say that we are not answering the requirements? No, they are not saying that you are not answering. What they are saying is that you are not giving the appropriate answer to the requirements. That is, if they have asked say X question, you are answering Y question. So if they have said what is a risk, then you might have told them the list of the risk. If they have asked that along with the ethical issue, tell us what the author needs to do here, so you have just mentioned the ethical issue and not mentioned the author's responses to it. So this is called incorrect answering. Even if you have answered, but this is not the answer to the question that they have asked. That is the biggest mistake. Let me tell you certain examples over here. That is why I have created this particular file. My dear friends, if you want this particular file as well, you can get it from my Telegram channel also. The link has been attached in the description box. Do not worry about it. Just in case if you face any trouble, do feel free to comment, or do feel free to comment here. Okay, now let's talk about the example. Writing definitions instead of explanation. Say, if they ask what do you mean by audit risk, what do you mean by audit risk, okay, and you have given the definition, you have given the appropriate definition that you have studied, okay, but you have not mentioned that what do they imply, what does it imply, you have not answered that, then your answer is incomplete, my dear friends, and you will not get the full marks. So instead of just answering via definition or via the language that you have just marked up, what you have to understand is that you have to give the implications of it, you have to give the analysis of it, and the best way of doing that is with the help of an example. That is, once you mention the definition, you can mention an example for that also. Then giving management responses instead of auditor's responses. What does it mean, management responses instead of auditor's responses? See, what happens is, if the auditor has identified a misstatement, now there's some action that is required from the management's end also, there's some response that is required from the auditor's end also. Now a lot of students make this mistake that they mention the management response. For example, if there is a misstatement that is identified in, say, financial statement, in, say, fixed assets, okay, property, plant and equipment, then a lot of students says this, that they go for the procedure that auditor should correct it. No, auditor should not correct it. Auditor should report it. Auditor should communicate it to the relevant level of management. And if they do not get the satisfactory responses, then they should report it. That is the auditor's response. Correcting it is the management's response. A lot of students does this mistake. So that is what is written over here. Then giving test of controls instead of substantive procedure. What does it mean? See, there are two types of procedures that we have discussed, test of controls and substantive procedures, right? A lot of students make this mistake that when they go for the audit procedure writing, that is when audit procedures are asked, they go for the test of controls procedure. For example, they write something like, the delivery challan should be approved by the purchase manager or the sales manager, or the goods received note must be approved by the quality check manager, or the PO must be approved by the purchase manager. Now my dear friends, this is a test of control procedure. This is not a substantive procedure. A lot of students make this mistake. Okay, so you do not need to repeat it. Now let's move forward. Let me save till here so that we do not lose it. Yes. Now answers are too vague. When I say vague, what do I mean by it? When I say vague, what do I mean by it? Vague as in uncertain, not specific, inconclusive. That is, you have merged 2-3 points and have not given the conclusion. So all of this is the result of the vague word. Okay, so answers are too vague. For example, check documents. Now which documents? The question has asked you that how will you verify the ownership of the particular fixed asset, okay, and you have written check the documents, check the relevant documents. Now this is not the answer. This is a very generalized answer. What you should have written is which document. Say you can write that you will check the title deeds via taking the, say, registry document, say ownership document, say invoice. What to compare, that is, instead of just taking the invoice or verifying it, you will mention what exactly you will verify. Say the invoice date, the amount, whether it matches or not, right? Then why it is checked, because this will set up, this will help us understand that whether there is existence risk or not, whether there is rights and obligation risk or not. So you need to relate it with the relevant assertions also in case of audit procedures. Okay. Second example could be discuss with management. Now discuss what? Discuss the implications, discuss the accounting treatment, discuss the risk associated. What? This is very generalized answer. Discuss with management. You have to be very specific. Every answer must contain what? What is the answer? What exactly? Say you will verify the title deeds. Compare with what? So you will verify the document date, whether the capitalization has happened in the current year only or not, and purpose, why we are setting it up, so that we can verify the existence and we can verify the rights and obligation assertion. Now common examiner words, what do they ask? If they ask explain, what they want is the cause and impact of it. That is, what is the reason of it happening and what is the impact of it. If they ask describe, then what do they want is detailed practical point. That is, in detail they want to understand what has happened and why. Identify, then they only need the list, so it state issues clearly. And if they say recommend, then they want you to answer the recommendation, that is the action, and not just the overall outcome of it. Okay, now let's discuss about the section A questions. Very important part. A lot of students ask me that how do we answer the section A requirement. So let's complete this section A requirement part here. Okay, now when I talk about how to answer section A questions, section A objective type questions of AA, one of the most important part of your overall examiner analysis report, examiner report analysis. My dear friends, section A objective type question is one of the most important part of your overall examiner report analysis. So let's go for it. Key themes tested. What could be tested here? Assurance engagements, that is, what types of assurance are there, what are the elements of an assurance engagement, how many parties are involved. Audit reports that we discuss about, the unmodified report, modified report, qualified, adverse, right, all of that. Misstatements, what could be the types of misstatement, what could be the impact of misstatements. Subsequent events that we discuss about the existing event and the non-existing event. Ratio analysis, but sir, this is not FR, right? But sometimes the ratio questions might also be asked, because the auditor's response, the auditor's opinion would also be impacted by it. Then the ethics part, that is also something that could be tested over here. My dear friends, I'm not at all saying that this is the only thing that could be asked, but based on our analysis of all the reports that have been submitted and all the question papers that we have seen in the past, these are the most frequently tested areas for your section 8 questions. Okay, now key concept to remember. I'm not saying that this is the only concept that you need to remember, but this is the key concept where a lot of students make mistake. That is, in case of audit, reasonable assurance is issued. Why? We have discussed it. Review, limited assurance. Why? We have discussed it in our regular lectures. Compilation and advisory engagements. In these, no assurance is issued, and this is where a lot of students make the mistake. That they say that some kind of assurance might be issued, whereas no assurance is issued over here. Hope this is very, very clear to all of you. Now, let's discuss about the questions on internal control deficiencies. That is, how do you answer the questions that are related to internal control deficiencies and what could be the possible risk over here. So, perfect structure is identify the deficiency first. That could be one. Explain the implication. That could be the second. Third is recommend the control, and finally describe test of control. Let's take an example. Identify deficiency. For example, if in certain cases you have identified that the purchase orders are not approved by the purchase manager even after there is a set procedure for that. So deficiency is that it is not approved. Explain the implication. If it is not approved, then there could be fraudulent purchase orders might be created, and therefore there could be outflow of economic resources of the organization. Recommended control is every purchase order should be approved by the purchase manager, and in case the purchase manager is not available, then deputy purchase manager should approve it. Describe test of controls, that until and unless there is a seal of the purchase manager or the deputy purchase manager, in case the purchase manager is not available, then without that seal, no purchase order will be processed by the purchase department. That is very, very important. Now, common examiner complaints. Students copy scenario only. That is, whatever the risk is there, they just copy paste it. They do not write any of their explanation, any of their implication, which is bad. No explanation of impact, like we have discussed. Unrealistic recommendations. What if they say that every purchase order shall be approved by CFO? Now this is unrealistic. CFO is not the person to approve the purchase orders in case of absence of purchase managers. It could be deputy purchase manager, right? Now, confusion between test of controls and substantive procedure. This is something that we have already mentioned above also, that a lot of students confuses between the test of controls and the substantive procedures, and that leads to a bigger impact in your exam paper also. Now let's talk about, let's save up to here, and then we can talk about audit risk questions. Now these are the questions which I would say are one of the most important part in your entire paper. So identify the issue clearly, explain risk properly. You have to evaluate it in the form of inherent risk, control risk, detection risk, and the overall audit risk. Then give auditors responses in the form of substantive procedures also. Key points to remember, that you have to mention the FS area, that is which area it is impacting and what is the assertion that is being hit, whether it is existence, whether it is rights and obligations. Then avoid generic responses. A lot of times, a lot of students mentions that in this case, say there is improper accounting for fixed asset. They say that balance sheet would be materially misstated. Now this is a very generic response. You have to be very specific that because of this the depreciation could be impacted, because of which the profit could be impacted, because of which the taxation could be impacted, because of all of these the reserves and surplus balance could be impacted, and therefore the balance sheet could be impacted. This is something very, very specific, and don't write management responses. This is something that we have already covered, right? Now let's talk about the substantive procedures. When I talk about the substantive procedures, we have clearly defined it during our regular lectures, but what we have to do is we have to clearly define it into three parts. One is what is the action that we are taking, second one is the source document that we need to verify, and third one is the purpose of performing this procedure. So for example, if I tell you that we have to do the physical verification, we have to obtain the physical verification report of the fixed assets from the internal auditor. So action is that we have to obtain. Source document is the physical verification report, and purpose, because when we see this particular physical verification report, we will get evidence for our existence assertion. So the purpose, right? Now example, agree payroll payments to bank statements, we have done. Recalculate gross to net pay, we have already discussed in our classes. Perform analytical review and investigate variances, also this is something that we have discussed. Now for substantive procedures, the commonly tested areas are, for substantive procedures, the commonly tested areas are payroll, inventory, purchases, receivables, bonuses, plus many more. Do not think that this is the end. No, many more also. Now let's talk about ethics and corporate governance. Ethics and corporate governance. When I talk about ethics and corporate governance, this makes a greater part of your paper also, because every time we can see that for 5 to 10 marks, this topic is also asked, right? So identify the threat. So what are threats? We have already discussed it, no? The threats, 5 threats, right? All of that. Then explain the impact of these threats. Whether we understand a lot of times, no, auditor will have to withdraw from the engagement, or auditor will have to apply the safeguard. So that is the impact, and give the safeguard that what actually is the safeguard that could be applicable over here. Common threats are this one. Plus there could be advocacy also. Okay, so these 5 threads are there. 5 threads. Advocacy is generally not asked, that is why it was not mentioned over here, but you need to remember that also. Safeguards must be practical and action based also. Okay, safeguards must be practical. It should not be something that is illusionary in nature. That is, you whatever safeguards you mentioned, that should always be in a nature that could be actually performed by the auditor or the relevant personnel. Now, subsequent events and audit reports. In case of subsequent events and audit reports, although in case of AA, you will not see many questions created on subsequent events, but still it is important because the core concept is from FR and SBR only, which is adjusting event amend FS and non-adjusting event disclosure only. So the core concept of FR is also applicable over here. Now, top 10 repeated examiner mistakes. This is the summary of whatever we have discussed. Let's just agree on this. Vague answers should not be done, right? These are the mistakes. That is, do not commit it. That is, do not commit. Okay, vague answer should not be there. No explanation, that is, you always have to give the explanation. Wrong procedure type, that is, instead of going for the substantive procedure, you have mentioned the test of control procedure. No source document, that is, instead of verifying the exact document, you mentioned the generalized answer. Generic auditor's responses, the general audit procedures. Repeating scenario only, that is, you whatever was mentioned in the question, you have just repeated it. Then ignoring question, requirement and requirement verb, that is, explain, describe, right? All of that. Weak audit risk explanation, that is, even if you have identified the risk, you have not mentioned the impact of it and why it is such a risk. Objectives instead of actions, that is, whenever we answer, we answered in the form of what we want to achieve, not what we have to do to achieve that. And then poor time management, this is very important. A lot of students make this mistake that to answer the section A part, they invest a lot of time, say 1.5 hours, and then they are left with very less time for the section B part. So instead of going for the answer that you are not getting, try to avoid it for the time being. Go for the answer that you best get and that you can write for the best part, and then go back to the answer once you have time, which you have to think about a lot. Now, final pass strategy to pass AA. Final pass strategy: master audit risk, controls and substantive procedure, like we have discussed. Avoid mistakes highlighted in examiner reports, like whatever mistakes we have discussed about, you need to avoid that. Use proper answer structures and write specific and practical answers. So this is some of the basic advice that you have given. But my dear friends, if you just listen to this, you might find it basic, but if you recall all the discussions that we have done, then we have given you a master stroke, we have given you a master tip for the purpose of scoring good marks in your AA paper. Now let me give you something even more important, which is magic formulas to score in AA. So what are these magic formulas? These magic formulas are the thought processes that will help you understand how to answer for different questions in case of AA. So number one is audit risk. In case of audit risk questions, what you need to do is you need to identify the issue first. You need to highlight which type of a risk it is and what is the impact of it, and then you have to highlight the auditor's responses. Assuming that all three is asked, if say only issue identification of issues are, you will only identify the issues. But if all three is asked, this is the procedure that you need to follow. Then deficiency. In case of control deficiency, you need to identify the deficiency first, then you have to identify the impact of it, mention the impact of it, then you have to mention which control would be there, and finally you have to test that control. That is how it will be tested by the auditor as well. You need to mention that. When I talk about the substantive procedures, what you need to do, you need to mention the action that you need to take in, the procedure that you need to take in, what document you will verify and the purpose of verifying it, that is the source of the document and why it is being verified, and what is the assertion that you are trying to test. And in case of ethics, you have to mention the threat, then the impact of it, and finally the safeguard of it. Now my dear friends, with this I have given you a magic tip on how to answer AA questions, and I hope this will really work in your favor in case of AA examination. Now let's come to some of the most important ISS. So identification of risk, then assessment of risk, then audit evidence, then analytical procedure, subsequent events, fraud, then audit documentation, then evaluation. All of these are very important. All essays are important, but these ISS are frequently asked. Okay, this is important to understand. Okay, now let's talk about the disclaimer part of it. Okay, What is this disclaimer, sir? What is this disclaimer, sir? Let me explain it to you. See, when I talk about the disclaimer part of it, what you need to understand is that whatever analysis I have done for you, this is the best analysis that I have done based on my best analysis. Okay. Now, what you have to do is you have to evaluate it yourself first, and then you have to follow and you have to complete the entire syllabus to score good marks. But this analysis will help you to score better marks in case you have very less time available, or if you have not studied properly till yet. My dear friends, all the very best for your examination. See you after the examination. I hope your examination is going to go really good. All the very best from my end. Thank you so much, and please feel free to comment in case you face any queries. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends as well. Thank you so much.